Well, Sam, I know that you're a pretty big time writer by this point, but on your last work, did you ask for an extension on your writing?
Yeah, I asked for a time extension and I had to throw a chip in just really quick.
But you
It
only get
only took about a minute.
yeah, and if you use too many of them, you run out. Like you only get before they want to fire you, and then they'll just hand you off to somebody else.
Very true.
Welcome everybody to the high roller edition of the Two Fish Tail Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Veteran Poker Stars.
And I'm one of your other hosts, East Coast Sam. Yep, this is our high roller episode. We previously have talked about the big one for one drop. This time we're going to be talking about the super high roller as well as the PCA. We're starting with the first editions of both events as they're presented on PokerGo and YouTube. So that's the super high roller in 2015 and the PCA in 2013. Really exciting poker action, as well as some interesting production things we'll talk about. But I'm excited to get into this one for sure.
I mean, we in that one big one for one drop episode, we really digged the narrative and the history behind these events. Because poker, the nature of high roller events, really the poker world had to develop to the point where you had enough amazing players willing to pony up that much of their bankroll to play in these events to begin with. And
Mm-hmm.
much like with the Big One for One Drop broadcast, particularly the 2014 one, which was 6 episodes long, a lot of these players the audience is going to be very familiar with from their prowess in past events and just from their personalities oftentimes coincide with that as well. So really, these are fields that you can really sink your teeth into and watch some really high level poker action with these prizes that would sometimes get near to that sort of main event first prize amount. And so naturally, my intrigue as a viewer of poker television was piqued when I learned these programs. Although I have a very different sort of relationship as an audience member with both of these programs compared to the main event on ESPN that we're so accustomed to.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that back in like the 70s and 80s, the main event like was the high roller event. Like you would be crazy to play for $10,000 at a tournament. There probably were some big cash games that were, tens of thousands of dollars being thrown around, if not hundreds of thousands. But there were very few high roller tournaments, even into the 2000s. So I mean, here we are in the 2010s after Black Friday, of course, but still in a time where poker is, really thriving and has been today. I mean, we're talking about for the super high roller, $500,000 for a buy-in, and then for the PCA, 100,000. I mean, again, big one for one drop was $1 million, but still, I mean, to have $100,000 and pony it up, and also the PCA had, you could fire two bullets. So if you busted, you could come back and pay another $100,000. It's just, the fact that I'm smiling and laughing right now, it's just, it just reflects the insanity. In terms of my own relationship with these events, I didn't grow up watching these two tournaments, so I don't have a super great relationship with high roller. So I was really able to give this my own perspective. I remember watching the big one for one drop, many years ago back then. So I have a little bit more of a meaningful relationship with that tournament. But this one was new to me in more ways than one, which we'll get into. But yeah.
So I have sort of two different stories here. With the PCA in particular, that really was something I always encountered through YouTube. You have
Yeah.
it wasn't just the high roll. You had the PCA main event, the PCA, different buy-ins, different levels of tournaments, and again, it's kind of its own brand. It's very separate from say the World Series of Poker or from the Super High Roller Bowl. It's kind of in its own space, and that was the Poker Stars branch of poker media of sorts. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't grow up like watching year to year. Oh, let's see how this event goes for these players. It's more of a from a compilation videos or from maybe just a thumbnail here. I'll see what happens to Esfand Diari in this episode or something like that. So it really wasn't something I had watched with any sort of regularity. But something that still kind of from the last decade or so, I've watched clips here and there over time. Whereas the High Roller Bowl, Super High Roller Bowl, we kind of aired on this sort of obscure channel. I think it was like CBS Sports Network. It was kind of in
Yeah.
the high hundreds listings in the cable that we had on our Comcast or whatever. And my first experience was actually the 2016 Super High Roller Bowl, and that broadcasted in kind of a live, like a 30-minute delay sort of vibe, very similar to how the ESPN would broadcast the main event, in the mid to late 2010s. And so I watched that, and I knew it was the second year of that event. And as it would turn out, I ended up watching, I think it was day 3 of that tournament. So that was the day that got them down to the final table. And so I saw the super crushing set over set situation between Reiner Kemby and Dan Smith. And from there, I was really hooked because this was, by that year, it was $300,000. They would decrease the buy-in size, which is an interesting choice, but maybe it affected how many players would want to play in it. And so they're playing for big bucks. And yes, it's less money for first prize than the main event, but still, given that we had guys like Dan Smith, Phil Hellmuth, Fedor Holtz in there, it was a very engaging feel. And also, I'm watching it live. It's
right.
It was really my first time watching a live broadcast of like the top pros playing, supposed to maybe like one pro at the final table, and me being able to watch that live on ESPN, for example. So that. And I didn't really keep up with the Super High Roller Bowl all that much in the years following. I did watch part of 2017, but I really kind of got lost in the shuffle with just for my TV habits and everything in the last couple of years. And I had known ahead of time who would win the 2015, the first ever High Roller Bowl. So I was spoiled to so much, but I had not seen any of the episodes in that tournament before. So
I didn't know who won. So
that's my long-winded way of describing my different relationship with both of these broadcasts and these tournaments compared to our long documented discussed talk of the World Series of Poker on ESPN. So again, very different situations. Even though it's kind of in reverse chronological order, but it is kind of fitting given poker movies. We're going to discuss the Super High Roller Bowl 2015 first. This was played at the Aria in Las Vegas. $500,000 to buy in. 43 players bought in. So actually, just one player more than the second big one for one drop, which had 42 players out of a max of 48. And so, a lot of the same players involved here. Obviously, half the risk, but still as deadly a field as you'll ever see in poker. With no rake taken. So that meant that the prize pool was 21.5 million, about a third of that going to first place, 7.5 million even. 7 players paid, so pretty typical pay structure there. And the key distinguishing factor between this and maybe other tournaments is the usage of the shot clock and the time extension cards.
Yeah, I mean, we made a joke about this at the beginning, but it does add a very different dynamic that you only have about a minute to make most decisions. Now, granted, most of these players were, at the least experienced amateurs, if not very well experienced pros. So this wasn't a big issue. They're used to making decisions quickly. But yeah, I mean, they kept bringing it up in every single episode, which is fine. And you could kind of tell, the tension, like you can tell the difference between a player making a quick decision and being like, all right, he's going to call the raise and move on versus tanking for 2 minutes.
Yeah, and there a key component of this Poker Go version of the Super Roller Bowl was this was again an episodic breakdown of the tournament from day 2 onward. So you had day 1 totally skipped with the exception of one little montage in episode 1 that kind of briefly spotlighted who was knocked out in that first day, and an overwhelming, if you ask me, presence in this tournament is the sponsors, the 3 of the key sponsors being Dollar Shave Club, DraftKings, and Amazon App Store, which I mean I'm not exactly enthralled to patronize after watching them get name dropped over and over again. And these were 45-minute episodes, so pretty standard. I would assume they aired on TV at some point. I'm not sure what channel they would have aired on or what time they would have, because I did the broadcast this live when it was happening. So, it's hard to tell. But the biggest sort of like, hold on, record scratch, stop the presses move was to have Kara Scott and Jesse Sylvia be the 2 in the booth. And you're making a face, so let me hear your thoughts on that.
So, we obviously watched a lot of Kara Scott. She's fine as a sideline reporter. She's fine with her little segments where, Daniel Negreanu is from Canada, blah, 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 that sort of stuff with the microphone. And we've seen Jesse Sylvia do short sort of stops in the booth before. He's been fine. Nothing special. But to make them both commentators, I mean, I've talked before, and even in our previous episode, about what I can tell when people are reading off of a sheet of paper or off of a teleprompter, and you can tell they're reading off of a teleprompter or sheets of paper. It even feels like they're sitting together in the studio and they're like leaning over and they're looking down at their paper like this and not even making eye contact with each other. Like all their voices just come off as too polished. The pauses are too polished. Like everything just has this veneer of inauthenticity. And it's just, you can really tell. You can tell the difference between the way I'm speaking right now, which is sort of off the cuff, versus like this. And today we're going to be talking about the hand Ace King versus Queens. Now, what do you do when you have Ace King for, that sounds so artificial and bad. And it's the entire way through. Like sometimes it gets a little bit better, but then it just goes back down and it's very bad.
I think it's some of the blandest commentary I've ever heard. Kara Scott, I mean, I think she does great when she's on the field. She just seems so robotic and talks almost in kind of cliches. Like she doesn't say anything insightful that that's drawn from like her own poker experience. Mm-hmm. And Jesse Sylvia, he's a bit better, but the thing is, they both kind of feel like they would be the alpha for an alpha beta combination. Like if they're somebody else, like you have like a Lon and a Lon. You don't have a Lon and a Norm in the booth, or a Chris Stapleton and a James Hardigan. You kind of have two people kind of doing the same thing, only they just kind of alternate who talks. They don't really. It just we had that one final table that had no commentary. They did like 13 World Series of Poker, Asia Pacific or whatever it was, or Europe.
Yeah.
And we talked about how that made it such an awful final table. And I feel like we have to change the definition. Like having commentary does not make the poker broadcast. It's having, D+ level commentary makes the broadcast 10 times, like it's disproportionate level of increase in quality based upon how solid the commentary in the booth is, because it really annoyed me how uninteresting everything is. I think we could have done a better job just talking over the episode and commenting on the action, because even just like their transitions from one person to another one talking just seems so forced. Like it's just like, okay, you talk, now you talk, you talk, now you talk. There's just no natural camaraderie or chemistry between them in the booth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it ruins this, because there were plenty of poker moments as well as table talk between players that I enjoyed, but it made it very, very hard to listen to. Like 2x speed, I just had to go through it.
Yes. And then the other like major criticism I have of this broadcast is the almost like just blatant advertisements for the Aria in every single episode, where it's like, welcome to the Aria. We have fountains in our main lobby. You can check out the water when you check into the Aria. And they have more than one of those per episode at times. And it highlights different components of the Aria, which I understand you're familiar with the Aria. There's no rake, so the Aria has to make some money somehow. But it just was so self-indulgent at times that it really annoyed me too.
Yeah, I just skipped through those after the first few. I'm just like, nope, hitting the 5-second forward button. I mentioned this. It's funny, I bring this up again. I mentioned how in last episode, we're talking about Poker Superstars. There were those long tangents about the hotel and the casino too. And I thought like, oh, it's some low budget TV show. But here's this like supposedly sleek production where you have, all these cameras set up, this whole studio, you've hired these two people, and it's like, you still have to do these advertisements. It's just ridiculous. It really is. I don't care about your water features outside your hotel. I'm sitting there thinking, go and funnel that water to people who need it. Don't show it off to people. I don't need to see it. It's very strange.
I'm with you there, and this would unfortunately carry over into the 2016 High Roller Bowl broadcast. I did watch the first couple episodes to sort of compare, to sort of bring better context to this sort of recap here, and it was a lot better, I'll say. But we'll get there maybe in the future. And they did change up this sort of Scott and Sylvia kind of got their shot at the big times, and they kind of got replaced the next year or so. I guess our opinions weren't unique to us in regards to their performance in the booth, but it is what it is. They're both still in the poker world, so I don't feel too bad about giving them a hard time here.
Yeah, I mean, I like them both. Again, I think they're both good as, pop into the booth to talk for a little bit, yes. Visit in the booth or sideline reporting or something else. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just it takes time to develop a natural speaking style and not talk like this when you have a sheet of paper in front of you. It just takes time, and they didn't have the time to do that.
Like, I'll give you an example in case you don't want to have to rewatch this, audience. Let's say Tom Marchese has Jack 9. So he puts a raise in. Curious Scott, oh, Marchese is in there with Jack 9. This is Sylvia. Oh, yeah, it's a good hand to raise up in case you run into an ace. You can always just fold it afterwards. Oh, yeah, you're right about that. It just goes like ABC. Every action gets this monotonous robotic sort of analysis that doesn't really amount to much when you're trying. When again, we're here for entertainment. We're not, because for the most part, these players are watching. We know to some degree. So again, one of the downsides of a high roller tournament is you don't have average Joe in the field that you kind of root for by proxy. You might have like average Joe businessmen, rich businessmen there that maybe it's kind of fun to watch them take a shot at the poker pros, but you don't have those sort of feel good, small time stories in there. So really the main drive of these high rollers is seeing money exchange hands, seeing your favorite players sort of in the mix trying to win, multi-million dollars. And seeing some pretty crazy poker action. And that also kind of puts a restraint on what this high roller ball can do well for the audience as far as entertaining them. It takes away one or two possibilities, so it really has to lock into those few bullet points that are feasible, and it doesn't always do that, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated doing a tournament where you just have a murderer's row of poker players. I mean, just, in the first episode alone, we have Sam Trinket, we got Scott Seiver, Brian Rast. I mean, we've got, shout outs to Ivy and JRB and Doug Polk. They all busted the previous day, but still, you've got David Peters, you've got Andrew Roble, you've got all these big names in here. And, each of them could be the main character of an episode. They're each appealing personalities. You could hear them break down the game. You could see them do all sorts of crazy hands. It's good to have all of them. It's good to have that grab bag feel, but it also makes the episode feel like it doesn't have a good center or a good focus. Though granted, it does again make you can't really guess from the first episode as to who's going to win or not. So that's kind of nice. But I would like a little bit more of a foundation for the episode.
I agree. And one thing I did enjoy is that they did fully detail all the rules of the shot clock, because if you were just tuning in, you wouldn't know exactly. Maybe you know generally what it meant, but not the specifics, how it affects the gameplay. Although because this is not like a live feed, the time extenders only get used so many times, and so it really kind of seems like a waste to give that much time to it when it doesn't affect the action all that much. And a lot of the times, time extensions are its own sort of topic in the poker world, because people kind of relish, like, they'll actually take longer per hand to act when they have a shot clock, because they will use the full length of it, as opposed to maybe taking 15 seconds before taking an act. But they might intentionally use one to act weak before doing an obvious raise with the nuts or something like that, or little things like that really just make the game take longer in some spots.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked before about a time clock, and I'm of the opinion that for the main event, if you want to have a 3-minute time clock, that's fine. 1 minute, I'm not okay with, because I think a lot of amateurs aren't used to time clocks, for one thing. Some people are get nervous under the bright lights or the stress of winning $10 million. They need an extra minute to kind of process things. And it's also like, an amateur who shows up to the main event for the first time sees that there's a time clock of 1 minute. Are they going to come back next year? Probably not. They're not going to like that they only have 1 minute to make a decision. For something like this, where it's a bunch of professionals, and again, amateurs who have done a lot of high roller events and even World Series events, I'm okay with it, because again, everybody's familiar with it. But for something like the main event, where you're trying to grow the game significantly and appeal to a lot of amateurs, I'm not okay with that. Yeah, I mean, here again, as I mentioned, there's a couple of occasions where people use time shifts, but it seemed like at the final table, like, I mean, I can only count like a couple of times that they used them. They may have cut that out of the coverage, but most people were able to make decisions pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's funny. We never had a spot where someone was like all out of extensions and then was like hard pressed to make a decision, or their hand got declared dead. That never happened. That would have been kind of fun for a guy like me who likes to see like pick sixes in football or something like that. That's kind of poker equivalent, I suppose you could say. That never happens, unfortunately. And obviously, this being the first edition of this tournament, it would play a factor in later years. So it's not like they were establishing a precedent for years to come. So it's not a huge deal, but it's just it's looking at what makes this tournament feel and look different than, say, the one drop did. Right. The one drop, both this and the PCA High Roller are kind of in the history books, kind of like in the shadow of a recent one drop tournament because
Right.
this one obviously came the year after the 2014 edition of the one drop, whereas the PCA 2013 was, of course, 1 year after Aria's 2012 one drop win. And so a lot of these players were in both tournaments, maybe did well in one and then got close to doing well in another one. So again, this was kind of the pioneering, kind of the golden era of sorts of sort of these initial sort of big buy-in events. But then you also can kind of look at to see in how given how small these fields are, there's really a limited sample size for who would play in these, and so it you know you kind of want to have a give and take of you want to have a lot of people in this tournament, then you also it de-incentivizes you to enter because of the high variance and how much money you're putting at risk. So in the poker world, I'm sure different pros have different takes on it. Some players can afford these hands to no problem. Some players could afford it, but maybe don't want to because of the risk, and some just can't pony up $500,000. And even if they sell pieces, they only have so much of themselves that's not like a life-changing sum to win the whole thing.
Yeah, they didn't really talk about selling pieces, which I thought was interesting. I mean, again, these players are all pretty good, so I imagine they had 500K. Somebody like Budija, who was a spelling bee champion, like where did he get that money from?
I don't know, he's got some rich family members. I don't know, but there is a lot to ponder about when it comes to the High Roller Bowl before we even break down the episodes, which is good because I really don't have a super ton to say about these because I found this to be pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things, especially compared to the one drop, where I just really got my knees in deep into this 6 episode sort of structure, giving us some of the great poker action with some great table talk and some great hands. I don't really have like a number of hands I'm like, this hand's amazing, you got to watch it in this run of episodes.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the first episode here, looking at my notes, nothing too special to talk about.
Yeah.
It is interesting that they decided to start this on day 2, but
Yeah.
not day 1,
Or
especially
even,
when,
or even like halfway into day one or something,
yeah, I mean,
first,
we get the standard flashback segment showing people busting, but that's it, which I think
yeah.
is weird.
Yeah, and so this tournament had 43 players enter it, and only 24 are left as episode one begins. And then each episode covers, a handful of eliminations. Usually, you can count on one hand how many bust outs are in that episode. So
Right.
it's not just a bust out fest every episode, which is good, but as we have a featured table and then we have a couple of outer tables. I didn't think that the handling of going from table one into the outer tables was all that exciting. I think that actually the subsequent High Roller Bowl in 2016 did a much better job of panning out to the outer tables and cutting to the action in a bit more of a kind of a raw, no like cards on the side of the screen like this. They're flipped over when they're all in, and we just cut to an all in. That's pretty exciting to go from table one like that. That's not really a part of this iteration, unfortunately. It's again one of those kind of working out the bugs, trying to establish a production of something and then building on it for years to come. So that's again maybe a little bit unfair to put that much pressure on the first iteration of an event, particularly one that was not like on ESPN still or something or some network that was used to it. But I'm rambling again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess the sort of highlight is that you have Scott Seiver, who is talkative and is willing to sort of trade information and stuff. But I don't have anything written in episode 1 that he really said that's exemplary.
Yeah, he definitely talks a bit more in episode 2. Another note of these, each episode does cover multiple blind levels. It's not like the old one blind level per episode structure of main events past. Scott Seiver definitely is one of the main characters. No shocker given how far he makes into the tournament. And he's definitely one of the more talkier players. This is kind of like the peak Seiver years still, the mid 2010s when he was winning, lots of championships, lots of money, and even he was again at a final tables at the one drop of the year prior. So again, just
Right.
a continuation of that success. That's also a part of his PCA success as well. So again, this is kind of the Seiver show in a lot of ways. But really, the problem is these hands are oftentimes just big hand runs into big hand pretty flop.
Yeah.
And particularly on the outer tables, especially that's probably more common than table one because table one gets a little bit more into the more middling hands to show each player in some sort of capacity on that table. But again, I think episode 2 a bit better than episode 1. Daniel Negreanu definitely runs into some tough luck in this day 2 at this tournament. He had a decent number of chips at one point, actually. But I remember that he did take down the 2022 iteration of this tournament. So again, this is kind of his first attempt versus his attempt. Very different contrast there.
Yeah, I mean, episode 2, yeah, I mean, Negreanu talking about almond butter, I guess is the highlight of the episode at the beginning. Just
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I wrote in my notes for episodes 3 and 4 that they were just forgettable and boring because, hands happen, people get knocked out, but it doesn't really matter. Nothing really stood out to me as like a amazing hand. It's a few funny chops, I guess, here and there, but otherwise, one of the biggest crimes that poker TV can do is in episode 4, which is where they show a montage of clips from earlier in that same episode. I mean, come on.
Yeah, there's a lamb chop montage because Ben Lamb chopped 2 hands. It's a montage with 2 hands, one of which is in the previous episode. Is in this episode, excuse me.
It's terrible.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And again, when we say poker is boring, it's when it's something. This episode's almost 7 years old, so it's not like super relevant to today. But I'm just trying to find something entertaining, a funny joke at the table, a funny run out, crazy. Some guy gets angry after the hand, something, and just none of these really happen. These players are very composed; they're used to the pressure, so you're not going to see like funny facial expressions or running to the rail in anger. Nothing like that. It's just hands happen, people get busted out, and the credits roll.
Yeah, I did think Kuznetsov getting carded, I thought was pretty funny because he does look like he's 14. So I'd be like, yeah, let's see your card.
Yeah, maybe 16. I'll take 16.
16.
Yeah. But again, between more Aria promos and interviews that really are pretty forgettable. I mean, a lot of them just talk about, oh, I'm happy to be here. I'm used to the pressure. I can't wait to play. They're not all that particularly insightful or anything that we haven't heard before.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of a football commentator saying, we got to play our game. We got to go out there and we can't play their game. We got to play our game. It's, everybody's happy to be there. Everybody knows each other. Everybody loves playing poker. It's like, go figure. I mean, you all play the same events. You're all on the same circuit. What a surprise,
Yeah. Episode 5 finally kind of brings up the stress of the game a little bit because it does function as the final table bubble / pay jump, making the money bubble.
Right.
We play from 10 down to 7. Unfortunately, it's funny. My favorite part of this episode was not the bubble content, but it was actually when they showed the shops at Crystal. Because I've been there at Vegas, so it was kind of funny to be like, "Oh yeah, I'd been there," and kind of like a sarcastic way, like, "Yeah, that was great. I've been there before." But the only hand really that was worth discussing, if you ask me, was really the last hand of this episode, where Andrew Roble goes pretty crazy with 40 big blinds and ace king when Rast has queens. It's not that a big hand running to a big hand is uncommon on the bubble or ace king against queens, but it's just that I think from an ICM standpoint, he wasn't the short stack. He had a good number of chips. He was 4th in chips at the time of 8 left. And really, we're not poker pros or super analysts at poker, but that's one of the hands I think that we actually could discuss as far as what is the optimal play on the high roller bubble of all things. What do you think?
Yeah, so Roble makes it 160K with ace king. Rast makes it 445K. Roble shoves, Rast calls. Rast there, I think, yeah, you're calling the shove there a lot of the time. I don't think that's a bad play. I mean, I'm a tight player, so I'm inclined to say with ace king, like I wouldn't even raise, it would have just folded, made the money. But yeah, I mean, with 40 bigs, when Rast makes it nearly 3x your raise, what does he have there? Does he have ace queen? Does he have tens? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think you're flipping at best on the final table bubble. And maybe part of you saying, all right, I'll be up to 80 big blinds. I'll be in good position to win. Maybe, your logic is I'm trying to win this thing. I'm not just trying to cash. But I mean, still with 40 bigs and you can still wait and you've got a bunch of small stacks, I think you could probably let it go after the raise. The 160K raise makes complete sense. That's totally fine. But after the 445, I think you got to let it go.
Well, I think you can call the 3-bet because the thing is, you mentioned, ace queen, you're up against ace queen a small percentage of the time. And otherwise, he's almost never folding. And if he calls, you're never ahead.
Right.
That's the problem. You're never ahead if he calls. And again, you're risking the ratio of how much you're risking to how much you're winning if he just folds there is just, I think, for me, not worth it mathematically. Again, I'm just kind of off the top of my head here. If it was me, playing in just some regular, $100 tournament versus again $500,000. I mean, again, for average Joes like us, we're $500,000. It's if we're in that spot, we're folding the seventh place. I don't care what's going on. If I was in there for free or in there for $500,000, but I think that again, sometimes that final spot before the final table is one of the most misplayed portions of any tournament you'll ever see. Whether it's Luis Valedor in 2014 or Fred Goldberg in 2006,
Yeah.
the Jamie Gold year. Really that final spot, you really have to think about the big picture. And I think Roble got a little too excited at base getting there. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have $500,000 in my bank account, so again, maybe he had a read on Rast. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into any
Yeah.
poker hand like this. So we're not trying to indict the guy or anything. It's just, yeah, I think I could have. I personally, me with my Mind Sport Olympiad medals or whatever, I could have folded. I don't know.
It was a 4.7 million chip pot, which was, I think, good for like second place just out of itself,
Yeah,
and really propels Brian Rast to an overwhelming chip lead at this table with 7 players left, with the blinds still at relatively small at 30K, 60K. Rast is the only one really with a huge chip lead. David Peters had a good stack too, but really your money should be on Brian Rast with that big a lead. And then, so the final table does get 2 episodes to develop. So again, I think that's usually a good thing for the
hmm
final table to kind of give each player a chance to kind of have a narrative. But I say that, but then it felt like for the first 25 minutes of the episode, nothing really changed at the table. Like hands happened, but no one really had a story to it until
yeah,
the action in this episode kind of picks up in the last 2/5. But from the start, we do get a kind of a funny little table talk with Seiver talking about Kuznetsova with his checking tell. That's kind of funny. How fast he checks, which again we mentioned in All In, the movie, about 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 6 seconds. So it's kind of funny that mention there. The very first hand ends up in a pretty brutal cooler for Tar Marchesi winning with a full house against a straight. Again,
yeah.
kind of one of those crazy things. When that board pairs, weird things happen with the straight. I'm telling you.
Very true.
But then the episode kind of settles into David Peters kind of being like mini bluffed, like small pots. He loses little chunks here and there. But then it ends up busting Marchesi. So it kind of like negates that narrative a little bit. And then, but prior to that, Eric Seidel did bust to Seiver. So the Psy versus Psy action there.
Yeah,
But and then as the action continues, David Peters again, he really probably arguably had the worst sort of performance. Not playing badly, but the worst sort of final outcome relative to the chip stacks when the table began. He goes bust out in 5th place.
yeah. Yeah, but it was just kind of a death by 1,000 cuts situation. There wasn't like one hand that took him out.
Right.
Could have played a couple things a little differently, but then it's
Mhm.
just what happens.
Yeah, and unfortunately, despite this being a final table of 7 players, really the focus is really skewed towards Rast, Peters, and Marchesi, if you ask me. So kind
hmm
of the other 4 kind of, I mean, Settle goes out first, so you can't blame that too much, but a little bit of an unequal edit for the players. And considering you had 2 episodes to tell the story, you probably could have given a little bit more love to the other 3. If you
Very
ask me.
true.
Whereas, so the poker play on display was very solid, like poker play game theory wise, very very tight, but just not very entertaining in sort of a Hollywood sort of manner. Just kind of
Right.
it's just kind of solid play. If you're watching like a textbook of the hands, you'd be like, oh yeah, that was a good play. That was a good job, but it wasn't like jumping off the screen entertaining.
Absolutely.
And then whereas part 2 of the final table, probably my favorite of the entire run. I think it's still not setting the bar super high, but it's probably the best episode of this entire breakdown.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, just the natural of, it's the final episode. We're playing down to the winner. There's that sort of drama going on. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's a couple of, definitely crazy hands that you could talk about.
Yeah.
And again, to also, as you mentioned, very solid play. There's very few mistakes that are being made here. And we talked about how, death by 1,000 cuts for Peters, but he really didn't do anything that wrong. He just missed a couple opportunities to chip up. And it's the same here. I mean, spoiler alert, guess what? The guy with the big stack, Rast, wins the whole thing. What a surprise.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, this could have easily gone Scott Seiver's way had, again, just a couple of hands been different. He played very solid poker heads up.
Yeah, and also there were a couple of the sort of the 09 2010 final table jitters where the under pair pre-flop flops a set and doubles up for a huge pot. That sort of wildness happens. So again, that's kind of the Hollywood entertaining flair to the final table, which kind of raises the action a little bit there. But heads up play kind of predictably gets done to Scott Seiver and Brian Rast, where Seiver has almost a 2-1 chip lead when heads up play begins. Heads up play only really is covered for the last 10 minutes of this episode, so it's a relatively quick edit. We get a flush versus a flush cooler that ends up for a big Brian Rast double, which really kind of turns the tide towards the Rast sides of things. And then there's a flip for the last hand, big shocker there, ace nine suited against pocket fives, and someone has to lose a flip when the money goes in. So it goes Rast's way. So again, solid poker. Heads up, it's pretty brief. It's a shame that we couldn't have a little bit more because these are two great poker minds at work. And heads up, brain against brain is always kind of a fun little, leveling war of sorts. But for what it is, it's pretty solid. I don't think it saves or salvages the rest of the season.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, again, it's three-handed and heads up was fairly good. Uh, but nothing. There's no magical Hollywood ending. It's kind of the guy that you expect to win wins. Again, the commentary just doesn't sell the emotion of it. I mean, there's a couple interesting segments where there's Esfandiari and Phil Locke just talking about how much they love Brian Rast and how brilliant he is. It's kind of seemed like he was a little bit of the hometown hero.
Yeah.
So I guess that's nice.
So my final analysis was it felt like it felt like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The peanut butter was the 2019 main event, and the jelly was an ad campaign for the Aria, and you just combine the two together, and they're just sandwich. Two things I didn't like combined together, and no, not so good. And that main event in particular, 2019, where they had Kerstetter in the booth with Lon and Norm, and again, it just didn't felt like that the commentary really elevated things because it was too much of a reporter vibe to it than a color commentator vibe to it. And you sort of fooled me because I thought you had a much more positive opinion of this season than what you let me believe. I'm glad we're on the same page here.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't boring. I wasn't bored by it. I mean, it was almost interesting how bad the commentary was. I'm looking over my notes trying to if there was any jokes or anything that I liked. I can't think of any. Yeah, I mean, I thought the hotel promos were just bizarre. I
Yes.
mean, I just think it's again, I get it. You don't have a rake, so you got to make money somehow.
I assume that's
But
why. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a promo inside a TV show. Like this commercial breaks for a reason. You could have had like an Aria commercial break commercial in there, like showing the hotel and everything, but they didn't even do that. They had to put it inside the episode. So kind of
yeah,
great.
yeah. I mean, why don't you make commercials with the poker players in it or something? Like you're just bragging about your hotel. Like that's all that you're really doing in these ads. Again, I don't care about your water feature. I don't care about your golf course. I don't care about the soap you put in the rooms. Like I don't care. Like just
And even if I did care, I don't want to see it in this context. I'm either going to go to the area or I'm not, and I'm probably not since I'm just annoyed about the commercial.
yeah. I mean, just bad. It's bad. Don't watch this.
So
Skip this one.
skip this one. Maybe watch 2016 and see how you feel about that. But again, this was the starting point. They would fine tune a few things and it would get better. But every program has a few bugs when you first boot it up.
Absolutely.
So that takes us to part two of our high roller special here. These 2013 PCA Super High Roller $100,000 buy-in. This was kind of the 10th year anniversary for the PCA. Poker Coast or Pacific Coast Adventure or something.
Something. Yes, I think that's it.
This was kind of the 10th anniversary. Poker Stars being a big sponsor for it, and it makes sense because you have all these different poker sites. And Poker Stars was a kind of the bought out Full Tilt Poker, so they were kind of free of any controversy by this point anyway. So they're kind of the good guys in certain respects. There is at the Bahamas Atlantis Resort. You actually could rebuy in the registration period of this tournament. So you can either show up in late reg for a bullet, or if you bust early, you can rebuy for another 100,000 and go from there. And a lot of players would actually take up on this opportunity, particularly Mr. Philip Gruesome, who took full advantage of that opportunity. Different booth this time. We have James Hardigan and Joe Stapleton, and to my surprise, I thought they were pretty good in the booth. Hardigan's voice is just really good. He's like got this kind of not thick accent, but it's kind of this very pointed accent when he talks, and he has a good energy to him too.
Yep, I'm with you on that one. Joe Stapleton is fine when he's not trying to be funny. So when he's talking about hands and what he would do, that's totally fine, whatever. But there's only, I think, one joke that he told during these 4 episodes that I thought was funny, which, to be fair, that's one more than Kara Scott and Jesse Sylvia from the last one. So there you go. But yeah, I mean, there's a little bit more of that Lon and Norm appeal and vibe, and they're more natural when they talk. So that's a lot better than it was here. And also, yeah, I mean, you mentioned that this is sort of the 10th anniversary of the PCA. Like, you can feel it. Like, they're definitely hyping it up. There's all these like sleek opening segments of like players, and like there's just half their face and they're looking determined into the camera. Like, there's a little bit more of an energy to this than there was with the previous tournament, which is weird given that all the segments on the Super High Roller, everyone was talking about how like happy they were to be there and how awesome they were, which is, it's just, you don't get that feel in this one, in that one, but you do in this one. Like, there's energy here.
Absolutely. And the graphics are very solid. They do have like a chips behind graphic during hands for the most part. Very sleek coverage. Again, the editing and production is very solid. This wasn't actually the first year of this tournament being broadcasted on television, but this is the one I latched on to just years ago, and I figured it would just be fun. It's in that same time span as that one drop in the Super High Roller Bowl's inauguration, so I thought it was appropriate. And again, a very similar field to the High Roller Bowl, the one drop, a lot of those top pros, businessmen in the field. And again, kind of in that peak era for a lot of these players. A lot of these players aren't really at the forefront anymore, so it's good to have them on camera here. And one recurring bit that I really liked in this sort of brand of poker television is the sweat with player X bits, where it's kind of a Jacqueline's wild card hands type thing, where the audience / the booth kind of play along with one player. We see what their cards are, and we don't know what the other players' cards are. And we have to figure out usually some sort of tough bet or shove on the river or turn. And I enjoyed that too for what it was. It didn't overstay its welcome.
Yeah, I liked it too. I mean, Jack Links, it's one player who we can't see the whole cards of. With this one, it's all but one player, so it adds sort of a different feel. I guess you could also say a recurring segment was the Lon Thinks game, or X Thinks game, because Lon wasn't there, which I thought was kind of funny. I mean, just seeing all these people bet money over like how many contacts does this person think this other person has in their phone? It's just like, it makes an interesting game to play as the action's going on.
Yeah, I think this came up in one of the main event Europes with Johnny Lawden actually in the tournament. The game being that it'd pick one person, a Lawden or a Brain, what they think the answer to a question will be for that person. Whether it's right or wrong is completely irrelevant. It's more like, I asked Sam, how many fingers am I holding up? And it's not how many I'm holding up, but it's what he thinks I am holding up. And then players would bet on the over or under as they kind of like bluff and increase the number, kind of like in a Price is Right sort of type thing. You want to be under or over, but you want to win the bet, obviously. So there's some strategy to it, trying to like bet them up a little bit higher than what you would think. And it makes for a fun tabletop. These are players who are all friends who have played each other and played this game, plenty of times. Dan Shack kind of gets in there a little bit because he actually chooses to write down what his answer is, which I'm surprised like that not everyone would do that, because I feel like you could be dishonest and just sort of give someone the win and deserve it. But I guess they take their word for it, which I understand is pretty important in the poker world.
Yeah, I mean it's just kind of it's a good again side thing. It's not something that they bring up multiple times. There's an explanation to it in episode 1, then it
Yeah.
just kind of like waxes and weaves throughout, and it just makes the game a little bit more fun. You can
Yes.
tell again the players are having fun and they're talking to each other and they're using the relationships with each other to do something else other than just play poker, which is nice.
Yeah. And so getting into this tournament is only over 4 episodes, which gives a slightly rushed feel. I mean, it's kind of in between the one drops, which were 2 and 6 episodes respectively. So with 4, a little bit of a time squeeze, a lot of stuff does get skipped. At the start of episode 1, which is day 1 of the tournament, there's only 44 players who have registered, and then maybe they've rebought. They don't really refer to the field as how many buy-ins are in, but it's more how many players are in. Then they refer to each player later as to how many bullets they are in for. So that's a little bit different. And again, as with a lot of high rollers, they begin very deep stacked, and the blinds do escalate pretty quickly to kind of keep the action tight. And again, we have our typical table 1, and our table is very continuous with other tournaments where you have a balance of our table action in the table 1. And there's some good stuff here in this episode. I really think that a different sort of vibe, different brand really does liven things up for poker television.
Yeah, I mean, off the bat in this episode, the sort of emphasis is where's Phil Hellmuth? Like, when is he going to show up? And they have supposedly a tracking camera to monitor when he walks into the building and stuff. And then yeah, these sweat segments are just very good. I mean, Esfandiari and Ivy are together, and they've been hyping up a little bit that Ivy had been in Macau for a little while. And now he's back to play this tournament. And the second Ivy calls, Esfandiari just says "nice hand." Like it's just funny. Just hear him,
Yes.
that table talk and that psychology just playing a role in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we, things like the Helmuth effect of playing the event, how they cut in some footage of the big game, which is again under the same PokerStars umbrella, which is kind of nice to have the access to that footage, because Helmuth, makes sort of a grand entrance, but it's not like his typical grand entrance where it would be in Vegas, where he'd have a costume or he just kind of walks in, everyone takes note of him. He only ends up lasting 33 minutes into the from buying in to busting. So even Hardigan breaks down how many dollars per second he spent at the tournament, which is kind of funny when he busts to Phil Gibson.
Yeah, it's also just it's a cooler of a hand. I mean, he's got trips versus a boat, and you see the whole hand play out. Like it's very, and you don't know what the hole cards are, by the way. When they cut to the outer tables, they don't show the hole cards until the hands are turned over. So there's a bit of a suspense element in there that just really works for that particular hand.
I agree. I completely agree. And so this episode is kind of the story of the Phils, whether it's Phil Ivey, Phil Hellmuth, or Phil Gruesome. And by the end of the episode, we're only down a handful of players heading into episode 2. Of course, Hellmuth being one of them, and of course Jeff Gross not winning. He busted in this one. He busted again later. So again, he was one of the second place in the Poker Premier League. So he's not unbreakable. He's breakable. That's what I'm saying. He's breakable. I think the episode 2 a little bit weaker because the action is maybe a little bit too unfocused. We have Esfandiari maybe in the spotlight spot, given he had come off that $18 million win the year prior. But really, there's some okay hands here and there, but maybe not my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a focus on Elke doing the Triple Crown, that he was going to win this tournament. Yeah. And there was one really cool shot where, Elke's reacting to a hand and he kind of like throws himself back in his chair like this. And they got it at an angle where like he's sitting back in his chair like this, and they have like the trophy for the tournament in focus. And, there's a commentary over the top, like, Elke's dreams of the Triple Crown are what, wearing down or whatever. And I thought that was like just like a really cool shot to just get that lined up. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it does kind of suck to see Elke go throughout this episode. He doubles up at one point against Raj Kumar with Ace King. With Esfandiari has 9s, actually. That's what happens. Sort of see his journey throughout. Maybe he can pull it off, and then he busts at the end. But, it's not like Elke. I don't have a strong connection with Elke either, so it's not like a huge moment in it. We did start to see Vanessa Selbst, who becomes sort of a factor in the next episode, chipping up and actually eventually becoming the chip leader. So that's a little interesting, I suppose. But yeah, it would have been nice to have sort of a more consolidated through line, whether it's Elke or Selbst or somebody else, that would have helped the episode a bit better.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Selbst because probably episode 3 of this tournament is probably my favorite episode of this entire cluster we're reviewing in this episode of the podcast because it is really the story of Vanessa Selbst and Doc Sands and the carnage that they either create or the carnage that they create for themselves. Because this episode covers from 20 players, the final 3 tables, all the way down to the final table. And again, another sizable sort of pay bubble, final table bubble situation, as you say in any high roller game where there's a final table is the payouts, not the maybe the last 2 tables or something like that. So right off the bat, we get some of the craziest power poker you'll ever see at this high stakes. So Phil Ivey squaring off against Doc Sands, where Ivey just cannot seem to fold a combo draw and a pair to Doc Sands' superior 2 pair. I really thought even though I knew he was going to call and lose, I really thought he was going to fold. Like seriously.
Yeah, I mean the action goes. Doc Sands has ace-5 of hearts, makes it 57K. That's pretty standard.
Yeah.
Ivy decides to call with 5 deuce of clubs. Okay, whatever. If you miss the flop, you can get away with it, no problem.
Yeah.
So flop comes out. Sands has 2 pair. Ivy has mid pair and a straight draw. So Sands makes it 64K. Ivy calls. All right, I guess so. I mean, I'm a tight player. If I have top pair, maybe I'm thinking about folding in that spot. I'm not gonna lie. So turn comes out. Sands still has 2 pair. He makes it 177K. Ivy now has a combo draw. So he makes it 527K.
Just call, man. Just call.
Yeah, just call, in my opinion, and see what happens on the river. But nope, he raises, Sands shoves, and then Ivy tanks for quite a bit. He's even like muttering out loud, which is very unusual for him.
He kind of breaks his composure, his like trademark poker table composure, where he's always so stoic at the table for the most part. There's maybe 1 or twice where he's not. And it really seems like he had no idea what to do if he got raised, which is, again, it's one of those things where you want to have a game plan whenever you make a big raise on the turn, because there's 1 card to come, but the guy might re-raise you anyway. So you really have to have, the game tree in your head. And it seemed like he cut off the branch of the game tree because he had no idea. And he ends up making a bad call and he bricks the river. And he's gone only, a handful of spots shy of the final table. And he still had a few chips if he folds after that, ill-advised raise. So I think maybe he should have folded. But again, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, I would have folded. I mean, it's just, Sands didn't say anything to him that caused him to kind of squirm. It was very interesting to just see him. He mentioned earlier that he had been a bit rusty on tournament poker. He was now coming back. But to just see him like break composure so entirely is just very, very strange.
Ended up being the biggest pot of the tournament at that time, 2.9 million, which would still be a heck of a lot of chips for the final table, let alone a little bit before then. And so that propels Doc Sands way up the ladder, and it really establishes that table as really a dangerous place because you have Selbst and Sands with all the chips basically.
Yeah, I mean, Selbst, kind of appears at a couple moments in the coverage. She busts Perkins with ace-8 over ace-7. She's involved in a hand with Seiver and Gruesome at one point. And then we get to, sort of the first clash between Sands and Selbst, which is a sweat hand. So we see what Selbst has, which is ace-king, not what Sands has. And, it's kind of an interesting action to see what exactly happens. We both, they're established as players that will play any 2 cards. They're super aggressive, but Selbst does manage to get away on the river when Sands makes a big bet, and Sands had 2-pair. So it is kind of interesting to see that hand play out. And, I had no idea about how this episode was going to end. So it's kind of interesting to see that hand be like, all right, Selbst is still on there.
There were compilation videos of Selbst with Doc Sands. These 2 hands were kind of paired together. And so I'd seen these many times before, and they're still super entertaining hands. One of the best parts of that first one, you just mentioned this with Vanessa hand, is that Sands refuses to tell Vanessa what he had, even after Vanessa Selbst busts later, as if it doesn't really matter at that point. It's kind of funny. And then there's a great line where he gets, I don't have cable. I'll get to relive the moment later, and the whole table laughs at the comment because they're just in awe of Sands sort of running the table over by this point. And again, they were the top 2 stacks prior to that ace king jack ultimately hand. And so Selbst still has a healthy chunk of chips for part 2 of the Sands Selbst wars, where it's arguably I mean, there's a hand of Selbst at the big game shoving of Jack 7 into Prahlad Freeman's aces. I'm not sure which hand is worse, this one or the high roller hand. It's pretty tough, but this hand, Selbst has 7-5 suited, three bets after Doc Sands raises with ace deuce unsuited, and then it just kind of goes barrel, barrel, barrel. And the third barrel, of course, being one of the worst time bluffs of all time when Sands rivers the nut flush. Sands has the balls to check the nuts to Selbst, who complies of a pot size shove. And again, this is all 2 spots shy of the bubble. And so the timing on so many levels is just terrible.
Yeah, I mean, one thing before going into this hand is Selbst calling Esfandiari's shove with ace deuce off, which, I hate ace deuce off. It's my least favorite hand. But still, I mean, I think, I hate ace deuce off.
I don't know. This is news to me.
I've told you this before.
7 deuce is not, you don't like, you like 7 deuce more?
7 deuce, it's easy to fold. It's like when you've got like 8 big blinds and you get ace deuce off, it's like, I know I have to go all in here, but I don't want to go all in. I usually
just fair. All right, fair enough. Point taken.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, Esfandiari shoves with pocket tens and Selbst calls him with ace deuce, which I just think is a bad play. But yeah, I mean, here, just from the beginning when Selbst like string calls, like it's just such a weird hand. And then, I just don't get the river. It's like, Sands makes it 84K after the flop. You raise it to 233K, then he calls. Then you lead out for 347K, and he calls. At this point, with 2 big bets, I think you gotta just check here. I understand it stinks to give up on a pot like that, but he's called you twice like that. He raised pre-flop,
and he has her well covered. Again, this is the chip leader of the tournament, with I think like at least double what she had to begin the hand, and so he can afford to make a bad call, and also there's always that chance he's trapping with a club. It's so many players nowadays like to call up a runner like a backdoor draw, and of course Sands had a backdoor straight and backdoor flush draw. So when the second club comes on the turn, you got to think about it. And then of course the fourth club comes, and a pair of fives is it's pretty weak on a 4-club board, but there's actually a few value hands that maybe you kind of are beating somehow. He just checks giving up, and just saying, you can just kind of see what happens when you check back and see what he has.
Yeah, you have a small degree of showdown value, so I figure just shut down, hope for the best, hope he's got 2 overcards.
And even if she loses that pot, she still has more chips than the majority of that very short table, given how much of the chips Doc Sands has. She's like maybe 3rd or 4th most chips at that table anyway. So you still have some room to make a chance here. But again, that's Selbst. She sometimes has that trigger finger that she cannot seem to take off the trigger, even though she almost did it against Gil Bowman years later.
Yeah, I don't dislike Selbst. I'm not one of those people who is a Selbst basher. It's if anything, I feel like you went for it. You tried to take it away. You did good instead of somebody like me who just folds his way down to 8 bigs, shoves with ace deuce, and gets called by ace 10. You tried to get your chips in and put yourself in the best position to win. So, no problem there.
Yeah.
It's just, it does make for a funny moment. It does.
It was funny. And again, it's not like this was not life-changing money that Selbst lost by losing that $100,000. So I don't feel too bad about it, but it's one of the more viral hands potentially of the Vanessa Selbst collection you can find on YouTube. So enjoy it, watch it, and move on. As we did, because we go from her knockout Jason Mercer busts out on the outer table, and then we get just one hand in this episode to cover the final table bubble, whereas Esfandiari, much like he did in 2014 the one drops, can't quite seem to fold a weaker ace to a stronger ace pre-flop.
To Doc Sands of all people with ace king of diamonds just goes to show that this was, he was Mr. Freeze at this point. He's just unstoppable. He ends up with 50% of the chips in play at the final table.
With 8 players left of all things.
Yeah, with 3 amateurs at the final table too. Something we didn't really mention was there were businessmen in here, and a lot of talk of them. There was a segment dedicated to them, and all 3 of the amateurs actually make the final table and have, they're not, again, Doc Sands with 50% of the chips left at the final table. Nick Schulman's also is at like 16%. So, not too much room to work with, but who knows? A couple of hands go their way and maybe they could chip up. Who knows?
Well, so Sands has what is about 45% of the chips with 8 players left. Obviously, the obvious favorites. Doc Sands is actually a bit called Pro Explains, where Doc Sands sort of explains the first hand against Selbst. It's more of a recap than really explaining like the
Yeah.
behind the poker face on in the big game. It's a little unfortunate, but at least they were trying, and it was a hand I did want to hear at least some insight behind. So a few points there. With the final table, it's all kind of covered in one big episode. So again, definitely has that rushed feeling at times. A lot of chip movement is rushed. Like at some point, Kerry Katz will have like 500,000 chips, and the next thing he'll have like 1.8 million chips. Like definitely a lot skipped there. Uh, but for me, probably the strongest component of this episode for the final table was the narrative receiver going from a short stack to making it to the very end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Seiver had been, again, he's one of those talkative players. He has a big presence at the table. Just off the bat here, we got to talk about that speech. I mean, that speech is just unbelievable. I mean, I always love it when players, make a big speech or do Hollywooding and then make a big bet. But here it was just like, it was just brilliant. I loved it. With Queens.
Yeah, so again, it's a speech that Saber makes after Doc Sands roars it under the gun +1. Saber overshoves, and again, the timing is pretty good because Saber he has maybe like 12% of the stack that Doc Sands has when the foul table begins. So even if he thinks everything goes well for me, it's unlikely he's going to get there against Sands at the end, and that does of course happen when they get to heads up. Um, but we see kind of a Dan Shackism where he'll just kind of do this awful overshove of a gut shot on a busy pot, and it ends up costing him his tournament life when Seiver just handed piles and piles of chips right off the bat from both Jensen and Shaq, resulting in Shaq's elimination in 8th place. And Seiver went from, again, could have been one of the first couple out in the first few orbits to now a big player with 7 left at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Shaq, whatever. I mean, you're first to act, get your chips in there. What is Jensen doing with King Queen? I mean, you got to just let that, maybe he's figuring, okay, I'll get Seiver out, but what's your read on Seiver?
You lose to ace deuce.
Yeah, I mean, what's your read? Like Shaq makes 100K, then you call, Seiver makes it 275K. What do you think he has based on that action? If he's comfortable making a 3x raise after you've already called, I mean, you got to just let it go. I mean, it was just very, very strange to just see him pick his chips away. I mean,
yeah, I agree. It ends up with Troyanovsky busting to Shulman, and then Shulman busts Jensen 20 minutes. This is again, so we have 3 bust outs, and according to the commentary, that was within the first 20 minutes of the final table action. So again, a pretty aggressive start. Even in the main event, we never saw, I think, 3 players bust out that quickly to right off the bat. Maybe in the first 10 or 2, but never, 3 players in the first 20 minutes. And so pretty impressive stuff. Shulman kind of getting his feet situated at the table. Kerry Katz is like probably as absent a player at a final table that makes it out to 4th place you'll ever see. It's the weirdest thing. And ironically, Doc Sands is pretty absent from the action for the first 2/3 of the episode, even though he was chipped later. And he was kind of hovering where he began with, so it wasn't like he was dropping off screen. But it's just something I'm surprised to see because you would think he'd be pretty active in the action early on.
Yeah, I mean, the standard thing is to do big stack bullying. I don't know why he chose not to do that. Maybe he was worried about Seiver because Seiver had been shipping up. Sands hadn't done anything wrong. It's Seiver on the rise. Maybe he was worried about him. I don't know. You still got amateurs at the table you can take chips off of.
Yeah.
And again, nothing wrong. I mean, we see him in a couple hands and he plays fine, but it's just interesting.
Yeah. A couple of sort of peripheral observations for me. We had one quick interview with Erico Matino, who we saw with Doc Sands in the 2011 main event, making deep runs with him on day 7. She alludes to his ankle injury that Sands in a different interview mentions he injured playing basketball. So we had a little scooter a la Mike Matusow for that week, obviously. And so it's kind of funny to see this big chip stack, tough guy, tall guy, hopping on 1 foot around the table to get to his scooter and back. It's kind of funny. Particularly when we get the heads up, which is a whole another story. But as the action goes on, we have a very bizarrely played hand by Scott Seiver during the Sweat with Nick Shulman segment.
Yeah.
Where Scott makes this pretty ludicrous overbet shove on the turn with top pair on a paired board.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand the purpose of that play by Scott, which is unusual because considering how high I regard his play. I was really surprised by his action there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Seaver makes 115K. Schulman makes it 315K with 10-9. Seaver calls. Then Schulman leads out with 280K and Seaver calls, and then Seaver shoves. So maybe he was just trying to see if just sort of stop the action, stop the. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, if he doesn't put Nick on a 7, which was what the board was like Queen 7 7 and then 10, then he probably thinks, you know what, there's zero chance I can lose this hand if I'm just going to fold now. I'll fold any draws or anything. But I don't know. It seems silly. If you don't think he's got a 7, then you want him in the hand still. So I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
And then, so as the episode goes on, Phil Gruesome, again, who wasn't really too active in the action, he busts in fifth place in a blind versus blind shove call situation. Kerry Katz kind of like off screen double ups his way to fourth place, going on to a flip to Doc Sands. And then Nick Schulman does the classic, I got a suited king in the big on the button with like 15 big blinds. I'm going to shove it and hope it's good. And of course, runs into pocket tens of Sands. And he was out in third. And that gets us to, of course, the fated clash of Sands against Seaver in one of the more amusing, before the action even starts, of heads up play in poker history.
Yeah, I mean, just before we get into this, I mean, Seaver had shoved with ace 7, Katz had called with nines, and Seaver managed to double up. I mean, there's again so many ways that this final table could have gone.
Yes.
So to have Seaver and Sands heads up is just a real treat. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I'm not trying to be mean to Sands. I mean, I know he hurt his ankle; it's very bad. But just see him like kind of like hop around discussing a chop for millions of dollars is just really funny. And to think that Seaver also was like playing mind games with him. Like, here's Doc Sands, like he's a I've heard his name mentioned for years. Like he's a good player, and to be like, I want 5% more. It's just such a Godfather tier move to make on Sands.
I mean, it's a weird. So, some more context here. Before they even begin playing heads up, they discuss: do you want to do a deal? Do you want to do a chip equity chop, where if you have half the chips, you get half of the overall money? So that way you have a more guaranteed sum of money to take home. And Sands has a fairly sizable-ish chip lead of heads up play beginning, but Seaver says that he kind of has maybe an edge heads up compared to Sands, so he wanted a little bit of a few points. So like a 55-45% split based on the chip counts, not the money divided in half. You get
Right.
so that's something that someone could easily be confused for. And the consensus with some of Sands' rail is that, well, it's not unheard of, not ridiculous to see what thinks he's on edge, but the number of big blinds, how deep they are, uh, sort of minimizes the edge a bit. If they had 1,000 big blinds each, Seaver's edge is much bigger than if they have 10 big blinds each, which makes
Right.
sense with the way the heads up play can flow. So Sands kind of rejects the deal, and ultimately, because of the final outcome, that deal ends up costing him $650,000 because he ends up losing. Spoiler alert! And so he locks into to only the second place prize as opposed to the money that he would have gotten had he gone to the deal.
Yeah, I had no idea how this was going to end, so I just figured, all right, Sands got the big stack. He ends episode 3 driving off in his scooter, which I thought was very funny.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the guy to beat. I figured he was going to win. So tens versus nines, I'm like, all right, this is it. End of the episode. Not so much. Seaver spikes a 9, and then Sands makes a king 4 shove makes sense. The king heads up's pretty good,
Yeah.
and Seaver calls it off with ace 7s. And you could tell, like, Seaver is excited and he's happy, but Sands is so demoralized. Like, he really is. He goes to his rail, he's like shaking his head. Erica's consoling him, and he says at one point, "So many heads up losses in stupid spots." And again, you're playing for $2 million. I mean, to just be, 81% of the time you win, and you've declined this deal. It's all of these factors go into this moment, which it landed for me.
Yeah, and I kind of felt like Sands deserved to win it. You can't really say deserve in poker, but he had the lead. He took down the money. He bet on himself, which is admirable. He didn't just take the easy way out and take the deal, which I probably would have done. I'll be honest. Money is money. I mean, when you get second place in a high roller tournament, you're the unhappiest millionaire in the world.
Right.
Really, of any poker game, you win $5 million for second place. Top price is 10 million. You're the unhappiest $5 millionaire in the world. And so it's this weird thing where the prestige of the title is also a big component of your mentality there. And for me personally, as some average Joe, if I won a lot of money, I really wouldn't care if I had a title with it. I'd just be happy to take the money. It's not how I'm wired, which obviously I'm not a professional, which is probably why. But nonetheless, I felt bad for Sands like you did, but it was a pretty strong final table episode despite all this sort of rushed nature of it, and really the whole Seiver Sands I guess negotiation was really fun to watch as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too familiar with chopping tournaments or anything like that. So it's just kind of interesting to see all the logic behind it. I mean, if I have a deal to make more money off of this, I'm going to take it. Even if it's $1, I'd go take it. So yeah, I mean, again, very high level play throughout. This was just, even though it was 4 episodes, and I don't normally like a final table just one episode because I feel like it's rushed. Fairly enjoyable. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more from Katz. Would have made him almost knocking Scott Seiver out land a bit better. But again, like, it felt hyped. Like, I really like this like weird epic Latin chanting they have at the beginning of the episode, like hyping this up. There's a very sleek opening sequence with each of the players like standing at the table with their arms crossed, and you see the chip counts. Yes. Very well done. And again, one joke by Joe Stapleton lands. It's after Dan Shack busts. And Nick Schulman kind of like turns and looks at his bags like, did Dan Shack take my iPad? God knows what I've been Googling. And then Joe Stapleton says, no wonder security is here. That was funny. That got a laugh out of me. So give you credit, one more than Kara Scott and Jesse Silvio.
And they had double the episode count as High Roller PCA had to do that to you. So even better.
Yeah, there you go.
So overall, I definitely enjoyed the PCA production. I've watched these tournaments. They went through a similar evolution as the main event did on ESPN, where they went from an episodic breakdown to more of a live edited like hand in the corner, hand number 97 out of 202 in the corner. Covering hands live-ish. So it's unfortunate, but again, I was happy to pair this with the High Roller Bowl, given how much I was let down. If I had to give these two a letter grade, I'd give the High Roller Bowl probably. I mean, I almost want to say it's almost a D tier, like with some of the worst main events we did cover. I give the PCA a B probably. It's 4 episodes. It's not a huge commitment. It's pretty quick and a very strong sort of ending there. So. That kind of combines into a C, but I know a D and a B for me. What about you?
Yeah, that's a Super High Roller gets a D, and the PCA would get a B. Yeah, like I would watch the PCA again. Like I'd be curious to see other events, see how they handle other tournaments. But yeah, Super High Roller, it's like I would consider checking out
Super High Roller Bowl. Super High Roller Bowl. Don't put the word bowl, please. You keep saying Super High Roller.
Okay, fine. The Super High Roller Bowl.
Thank you.
Checking out others just to see what it was like, but this was disappointing.
That about covers our look back at High Roller Poker Television. There are plenty of other High Roller events that we can discuss in the future. We also are looking into discussing the short-lived ESPN TV show Tilt, which we'll be watching together very, very soon. We'll be happy to discuss Michael Madsen, hopefully embarrassing himself a bit less than he did in All In, but we'll see.
Yeah, and as always, we are always happy to have people on the show who have been in television poker or want to talk about their experiences, whatever they are. Feel free to let us know, and obviously drop any comments in below if you have any thoughts about what we've just discussed or any thoughts about our commentary. We'd love to hear from you. Again, go check out the Mindsport Olympiad. Very cool stuff. No updates on that. Just go check it out. It's cool. And we'll see you in the new year, because here we are almost at the end of the year. I mean, we've been doing this podcast for well over a year now plus.
Yes.
So we're going into our 3rd calendar year of doing this podcast.
Yes, and I think it's been a great year. Podcast has grown. We had some amazing interviews. Again, some of my best afternoons or evening hour and a half long blocks of my year. I've been our amazing talks of all these great players that gave us some of their time, and I want to continue that into the new year. And I'm happy to be talking to them with Sam, who just like me, really our poker nerddom. We love to talk about these sort of topics, and we're going to keep going strong into the next year.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, World Series of Poker is it sounds a long way away when I say it's in July, but all things considered, we're getting closer and closer to there. So hopefully it'll be an exciting year for poker. And we're also on the lookout for any Poker Go events or anything special that's online. If you have know of any events that are going to be televised or streamed or anything and you want us to cover it, also let us know. We're happy to check that out as well.
Yeah, but until next time, guys, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, and enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.